Welcome to our second part of the master class. This second segment deals with understanding your website. It might sound very simple, but we're going to get into what's behind what you see on your browser when you visit any type of website. The basics of how the browser side interacts with the back-end side, which is the server side. So earlier we discussed in the first segment, most of the basics about servers, how they work, how to choose them, the pain on your business, what kind of hosting company to go with, just the basic stuff that you really need to get started to understand what you need for your business. So now we're going to get a little deeper. We're not going to get too technical, we're just going to get into what a website's composed of and how to understand what's the difference between server side versus browser side scripting. So I was talking about earlier about the browser. So the browser, we've used them all from Internet Explorer to Firefox to Chrome, Opera. If you're on Mac, you're probably using Safari, something else. Also they have Chrome and Firefox for that too. Most of these browsers have one thing in common, and that's called JavaScript. Not to be confused with Java. Java is a separate programming language, of its own. It's not a scripting language like JavaScript, which is designed for, browser use, for, browser side scripting. So JavaScript is basically built in to your browser. All browsers have to have JavaScript updated, so everything across the board is compatible. So when you put up a website and you put in, content management system like WordPress, or if you're doing it manually through like Bootstrap or something like that, you always need to kind of worry about compatibility issues, especially if you're doing it manually. WordPress and Joomla, all these content management systems, someone have kind of figured out how to stay compatible since you're within an environment that's already updated for that. If you're doing it manually, then you really have to test your JavaScript code to make sure it's working across all browsers. Now here's one little key thing is, for example, for IE, Internet Explorer, they have a different type of JavaScript engine. It's not even JavaScript, it's something else. Basically for them you have to write an exception in your code to be able to work in Internet Explorer's environment. Now they're supposed to be updating that to be cross compatible with everything else, but as of now, Internet Explorer still needs its own special exceptions to work across all the browsers for everything to look pretty much the same. I mean, you might see slight variations here and there depending on the browser, but across the board they should all be pretty much the same. So as I was saying earlier, if you're doing it manually, then you probably know what you're doing. Just letting you know that you have to make sure they work across all the browsers, and neither one is left out, because that just means that those people in those browsers are simply not going to be able to view your site properly, and probably aren't going to stay. So that's one thing to think about as far as cross compatibility. You just need to remember that a website in its raw form is on the browser side, what you actually see is nothing more than JavaScript, CSS, and HTML. So as long as you know it's a combination of those three things, for example, that's what Bootstrap is. Bootstrap is a framework in order for you to easily just write commands that they've already created for you in a package that includes JavaScript, CSS, and HTML. So now instead of having to do all those things manually, you just use Bootstrap, write your commands in directly, from their source page that you pull from their server, or you can put on or you can pull it from their website, download it, and put it on your actual server, or you can just call it directly from their server. Doesn't matter. In essence, it's the same thing as if you were to do it all again manually through HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. So basically it's a combination of those things to make things very quick and easy. And also WordPress and these other CMS systems also use Bootstrap in that same form. It's just that they're within a framework, so now it's within a dynamic environment. That's something we're going to get into later. I don't want to get you confused right now. So now we're going to move over to the server-side scripting that works with the browser-side scripting we just discussed. So the browser-side scripting, again, is just the stuff you see. There's not much actually happening there. There's no, it's all visual. It's all cosmetic at that point. To where the server-side scripting is now going to make, the browser-side interactive. Like a search bar, you type something in, or you're filling out a form, or physically doing an action. That's going to be on the server side, actually performing that action using what's called a server-side script like PHP, Perl, Ruby on Rails. There's many of them to choose from. Right now, I prefer PHP. It's one of the most popular ones. It does everything you will ever need. It's very scalable. So that's the reason behind that. So when we look at server-side scripting on its own, obviously that's where it gets more complex, because the server-side scripting also connects with your database. In most cases, you're going to be using, for example, MySQL database. There's other ones for other things, but right now we're just going to discuss the MySQL database. I know there's probably some people that might shy away from understanding databases, or taking the time to see how they work and things like that. Reality, it's not that difficult really when you think about it. If you understand, for example, Microsoft Excel, which is a static spreadsheet, and you manipulate it however you want, just look at it as something similar to that, but being dynamic, where you can now mix all the little cells, you can mix them with code and make them do all kinds of impressive things. It's really up to your imagination. It's not something that's super complex, or you don't not having the need to learn about it just because it's something developers do and it's not something you want to know about. Forget all that. It's really simple when you understand how all these things, again, work together. That's something I want to really stress, really get into your mind, how these things work together. So again, the MySQL database, it's most widely used. It's open source, free to use. So MySQL is definitely something you want to learn if you don't know it already. And that's one of the goals of, this masterclass. So don't worry about it. We're going to get into it, in a very basic fashion where we can put all these things together and you can easily see how it all works. So I want you to take a moment and just picture this in your mind so we can understand how these parts fit in, how they all come together. So let's start with the beginning part that we discussed earlier, which was the browser side, which is what you physically see, that uses JavaScript, CSS, and HTML. So I want you to have the website, your website or any website you like, just put that in your mind, the front page. So envision that front page. You're seeing, the visuals of the JavaScript, CSS, and HTML. So now imagine with that visual at the same time on that page, you also have, in this example, PHP code. Now the PHP code is only going to run what's happening behind the scenes. So for example, if I have a form, I'm going to fill out an opt-in form for a newsletter, or if I'm going to buy something from Amazon, whatever it is, when I get to that part where I got to fill a form out, each one of those fields, the form itself is tied to the server side, which would be the PHP side, and that ties in with the MySQL database. So just picture again, okay, you're at the website, you're going through, you're either filling out a form to opt in to a newsletter, or you're buying something. When you actually go to that page, what you see again, the forms, is again the browser side scripting. But the second you start typing in, words into that field's going to start processing the code. And when it's processing the code, it's going through the database to process the information that's held in the database. So you have the code side, which is the PHP side, that interacts with the server side as well as the browser side. So you could look at the programming language like PHP or whatever it is you're using as kind of the middle ground, the middleman that pulls the information from the server, whether it's client or timestamp or whatever it is, first name, last name, whatever it is, bringing that onto the actual page, web page itself, through the PHP, and then visually you're seeing the form on the browser side through the JavaScript, CSS, and HTML. I know at first this might sound a little bit confusing, but again, I just want you to envision those three layers. You have the visual, the website, browser side scripting, all the nice pictures and forms and all that kind of stuff. All that stuff will be hollow without the PHP and MySQL behind it. So that form will not work if you do not have the server side behind that, the PHP and the MySQL. So when you fill out that form, you hit submit, the PHP is going to process that, send it over to the MySQL database, and store the information, approve it, and then again the process happens, many times during one day when many people go to that website and either buy something or sign up for a newsletter or whatever it is. So I just wanted you to get a bird's eye view of how these three things come together, basically are superimposed together. When you see that web page, you have all those things happening at once. Normally it just doesn't seem that way originally, just simply because most of it's on your browser. But behind the scenes, where it actually saves the user and registers and go through all the whole process, that's happening on the server side that you're not seeing. So once you understand those three components, you can pretty much build any website you want. It doesn't matter what it is. It could be a retail site, a portal site like Facebook. It could be pretty much any site, because they're all going to use those three components no matter what. So we just talked earlier about browser scripting versus server-side scripting. That's all really geared towards building a dynamic website. And the static websites are pretty much a thing of the past. In the 90s and early 2000s, a lot of sites were static, meaning that you had to physically edit every single page individually, and that was pretty much a nightmare. So that's where content management systems like WordPress and Joomla started to become very popular, simply because everything's under one roof and it's a dynamic environment. And that means that you change one thing on your website and everything, all your pages reflect that change. That's the best way to update your website. Obviously, you don't have to go through manually on a static scenario where you have everything on separate pages. You got to go through and do all that manually. That can become a very big headache, especially when you're starting to grow and you get more traffic and more pages, and it's you just don't want to have that as an issue. Definitely go with some type of CMS, content management system like WordPress. If not, if you're more of a custom type of business where WordPress is not going to work out too well for you, then definitely go with a framework like Yi framework, or one of these frameworks that kind of includes it all for you. It still keeps everything in a dynamic environment, and that's a Yi, Y-I-I, and that's one of the frameworks of many frameworks out there. Just happens to be currently a popular one that I like. That's really all I need to explain about static versus dynamic pages. I have a lot of clients that are still on a static website. I'm thinking to myself, why are they still managing their website this way? Now I actually want to show you a visual example of how these dynamic pages are put together, so you have a better idea in your mind of how this stuff is working behind the scenes. Here's some PHP code I wanted to show you. This is taken directly from our Omni software, just as an example to show you the difference between static and dynamic pages. So this is obviously a dynamic page here written in PHP. What I really wanted you to pay attention to is this right here, this require once, for example. This could be called include, or there's a few other commands you can use to include it, depending on what you're doing, depending on how much security you want to actually add to include in this file here. So in this case, we're just requiring this file one time. It's inside the library folder, the lib folder, and it's calling these two files. So the neat thing about dynamic pages is now that you can call these two files, and basically all the code on those pages are included on this page. So it's the same thing as if I were to go to each one of these pages, copy the entire thing, and paste it in here. So obviously it's a lot easier to manage once they're all separated. So assume that your header file of your website, your footer file of your website, it works the same way. So if you only change one of those pages, it reflects across the entire website. You don't have a bunch of pages, that you have to manually go into and change everything, separately. So this was one of the things I wanted to show you to give you an instant understanding of what we mean by dynamic. So it simply means you're breaking up the pages into usable parts that you can easily change later, and it changes everything at one time, and it's much easier to manage the code, as you can see. And then down here, for example, this is just calling the actual sign-up form, of our OmniSecure software that can be used for registering leads, buying membership, buying products and services, whatever it is. So this actually links over to this file here, which is simply some JavaScript and CSS. There's no PHP in here, and this is just basically the actual template of the sign-up form, which I'm going to show you in a second here. But you can see the variables here that it replaces with. So if you have fields like first name, last name, email, things like that, all these fields correspond to these variables. And then you have total price, if you have multiple products. So this form is going to look something like this. This is just a very raw, generic default form from our OmniSecure program. So you can see all the fields here. You can see that if I type something here and I tab over to the next field, you see right here it's actually going in the database, and it's checking to see if this user is already there, which it is. And this is just basically a test of all the different variations of fields you can have. You can even have terms and agreements and all that kind of stuff. So I just wanted to give you a really quick, fast example of how these dynamic pages are put together, whether it's a form, whether it's a page that has products listed, whatever it is. Now this should give you a much better understanding of what's going on behind the scenes. I don't want to spend too much time explaining this part, simply because I just wanted to give you a general grasp of how those three components work together. In the later videos that I'm going to have are going to give you a real example of how all that stuff works. So you're going to have more detailed information on those things in later videos. So the other thing I want to tie into this that I believe everyone should have a basic understanding of is, now the next part I'm going to get into is going to have some visual video where I'm going to show you the basics of FTP, which is File Transfer Protocol. And then, again, that's just simply transferring files back and forth from your your PC to your server. And I'm sure most of you already know the basics of FTP, but again, it's how it fits into this whole, how this piece fits in, so it makes sense when you do these things. So just from what we've talked about earlier, now it's very easy to explain what FTP is. So again, FTP is simply a secure way of connecting from your PC to your server and to transfer files from your PC, and vice versa, back and forth. Now the other one little thing that FTP is very important for is to set permissions on certain folders that you don't want the public to have access to. And that, again, will be something that we get into, in a little bit once I show you visually, what I mean. Okay, so here's a FTP program I'm currently using right now. It's called FileZilla. I'm sure most of you have heard of it before. We're probably using it. If not, just go to their website, filezilla.com, download it for free. I just want to go ahead and log into my server to show you a real quick example of how to use all the basic essentials of what you need from FTP, just really fast, because there's really nothing to it. So I'm going to connect to my host, port number, by default, I'll leave it blank. Normally it's 21. If not, just go ahead and change it to whatever port you're set to. Set your username and password, hit connect. Now basically, you already know the left side of this is going to show all your folders of whatever it is on your PC. So let's assume you're installing, let's say, web script, PHP script on your server. You've already uploaded the actual folder. Let's assume this is the folder right here. And you're going to go inside of it, and the last step of it is just simply to set the permissions in certain folders, maybe 3 or 4 folders. That's about it. So all you're going to do at that point is right click on the folder, click follow permissions, and then you're going to see 9 checkboxes. So right now the number is 700 with these 3 checked. So just assume the lower the number, the more secure the folder. So right now this folder is very secure. Most of these folders, when you're installing a script, are going to want 755. So to do that, you check off, for example, these right here, and you're going to see the number change. Now it's 755. So if you do all of them, you're going to see 777. That means it's wide open to everybody. Anybody can go in this folder and download whatever contents are in it. So most of the time it's going to be 755. So that's really all you need to remember. I mean, once you've uploaded the files, just check what folders need to be set to what permissions. The rest of the installation is going to be setting up the MySQL database. So that's the next part I'm going to show you visually. So let's get out of here and move on to that. And here we have an example of what it looks like when you log into your control panel. Every website's going to have it. So if you're on a Linux server, you're going to be like your site name.com/cpanel. If you're on a Windows server, then it's probably going to be /plesk or something like that. But generally, just cpanel or CP. Check with your hosting company. Most of the time, it's just cpanel like that. And then you're going to come here. You're going to choose a domain. If you have multiple domains, and this is going to be exactly the same across all your domains on this server. So all you're going to do is look for databases. Click on MySQL databases. Now here's the actual page that you're going to actually create your database and create the user and set the permissions. So let's go through this really quickly, very simply. Right here, you're just going to type in, your new database name. It's going to be, in this case, Omni CRM is the prefix. So whatever your domain name is, you're going to have a prefix for that, similar to what it's already called. And then you're just going to type in, for example, here I'm going test. It says yes, I can do that. Create database. So now it says added database Omni CRM _ test. So I'm going to go back. Now all we need to do is just grab it, create a user. So I'm going to go here where it says MySQL user, add new user. I'm just going to type in test user. So again, same prefix, but this time it's a user. And password, I'll just type in test. You can also generate one if you want to. One's 5 characters, so I'll put test 1 2 3, test 1 2 3, and then I'm going to click create user. Now I have successfully created a MySQL user. So now the very last step, again, very simple. All you gotta do is go here, choose the user that you just created, the one we just made, and then you're going to choose the database that we just made. And I'm simply going to add this user to this database so it has permissions. So I'm going to click add. So right here, depending on what you're doing, in those cases, if you're installing software, you're going to grant all privileges, everything. So I'm going to do that, click make changes. That's it, you're done. Just go back, that's it. There it is, it's done. So once you're done with this step, all you're going to do is go to your actual installation wizard of whatever software you're installing on your server. It's going to ask you for the database name, username, password, which we just did all that as you saw. You just fill in the blanks, and that's it. You're good to go. Hit continue, and you're done. Okay, and I just want to discuss one last part in this second segment of the Omni Chronicles. So let's move on to that part. For this last part, I felt it was important to talk about, mainly because it's been a pretty big trend in the last few years, and that is what's called hosted solutions, or SaaS solutions. That's SaaS, software as a service. That seems to be, very popular choice nowadays, where you can go and pretty much any system you want to get, whether it's a CMS or a membership system like Omni Secure, or a shopping cart, help desk, whatever it is. A lot of these have, all-in-one type packages too. And basically they charge you a monthly fee for use of the software, depending on what version of the software you're leasing from them. So basically you're leasing the software. The software might be nice, everything is great. Me personally, I prefer what's called standalone software, which has been how it's been done for a long time. So the reason I say that is because when you have your own standalone software that you install on your server, you pretty much own that software on your server. You can take it with you. You can modify the code. Well, in our software, in any case, you can do that. It's open. The source code's open. Other software, the source code's going to be encrypted. You can't get in there. You can't do the things you need to do. And then when you combine that with a hosted solution like a SaaS software, something you got to pay for monthly, you lease it. It's extremely hard at that point to do any kind of true customization that is specific to your business. So I felt it was important to tell you the difference between you leasing software, which is a hosted solution, again, SaaS, software as a service, versus standalone software you actually install onto your server, and that you can easily modify and scale up in the future when you need to. Now that's all I wanted to say about hosted solutions versus standalone solutions. Well, this concludes our video, our second segment, the basics about your website. So now we're going to move on to the next segment, which is going to deal with e-commerce mainly. Everything dealing from your users to your group hierarchy, your permissions, your registration forms, your login forms, how all these things come together. So this next part, we're really going to get into the meat of it. So I will see you on the other side.